Our subject tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is the techniques of meditation. Meditation has, of course, spread across the Western world as the result of the Orient. The Orient has, as it were, attracted attention and towards meditation, and we must remember, however, that meditation was practiced in the West for many thousands of years. You all heard of the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. And if he was a Roman emperor and he meditated, you would have thought that it would have caught on quite well. However, with the insurgence of the age of Pisces, the age of emotion and idealism, meditation really didn't get much of a chance, and prayer superseded it very quickly. The Avatar brought in the concept of prayer, and for 2,000 years meditation in the West had very little chance. But the times have changed, and the age of Pisces is ended, and we are on the dawn of the age of Aquarius. And ultimately, of course, meditation in the West in particular will be led into the channels of group meditation. Group meditation is very, shall we say, susceptible to Aquarian influence. And of course, we have to remember that Jupiter is the esoteric ruler of Aquarius, and group meditation, with its enormous possibilities and ramifications, is bound to be the ultimate attained in our new age. We need to spend careful time understanding meditation. We need, of course, to practice it constantly. Meditation should be something which becomes virtually a habit with us. At least for half an hour a day in the mornings, if possible, the early morning, round about the dawn, and again later when we are acclimatized to it, twice a day, once again in the evenings, again round about the time of the setting sun. Anything that we practice habitually in our everyday life will ultimately seed itself in the inner worlds. You can test this out, if you like, by observing events in your family life. If you lost a husband or a dear one, you would find that in about 3, 4, 5 months' time, the event that you have experienced in waking consciousness, the tragedy in this instance, is reflected into the dream life. You don't immediately dream that you have lost that person. It takes some months for it to percolate into the dream world. Now, meditation is just like this. And when you can practice meditation, and even more important, lead the meditative way of life, it is only a matter of time before these qualities are taken up in the inner world. And given consciousness of the inner worlds, you can use them as a springboard to higher spiritual attainment. And I always do emphasize, and it's so important, that meditation is an energizing process. It involves the bringing down, the bringing in of energy not normally available to average man. Not normally available to average man. We have to understand that the energy that we are dealing with in meditation is basically fire. It's basically fire. If you observe the human body with ordinary eyes, you have concealed from you the nature of what is going on in the human body. The body is in dynamic equilibrium. There are literally billions of electrical processes going on in the body. Enzymic activity, the activity of electron exchange, you have the interaction of base and alkali in the body, and a clairvoyant or a person capable of etheric vision sees initially the human being as a sea of fire, a sea of fire. The fiery reactions and interactions of chemical processes, especially at an etheric level. The clairvoyant, capable of astral vision, sees again another sea of fire, which is the astral body. Now, the fire that I have described up until this moment is fire of a lower order. In meditation, we are concerned with spiritual fire. Fire has a great number of, shall we say, cloaks and masks which it presents to mankind. We're concerned here, however, with spiritual fire. In Western terminology, the man who enters meditation is a Promethean. He is a god. He is a man who is becoming a god. And before his time, he penetrates the higher regions, like Prometheus. He goes into the kingdom of gods and steals the fire of the gods and brings it down to mankind. This is what we have to do in meditation. We have to, as it were, process ourselves in such a way that we become the Holy Grail. Now, some of you who have visited the appropriate areas in England understand a little more about the Holy Grail. That the knights in shining armor sought the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail, in fact, was their own selves. That they had to purify themselves as knights of chivalry. They had to don armor of great shining, glistening quality. And then they ultimately discovered the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail was in them. Now, meditation is a process by which we bring fire down, spiritual liquid fire, into the Holy Grail that we have within us, and which, in fact, we have to create through a process of purification. Now, all of you know that fire implies purification. If you see a blow lamp at work, occasionally a spark will flare up in the metal or material that is having the blow lamp applied to it. A little bit of dross and impurity. And this is true of the spiritual fire of meditation. It burns up the dross. If you have ever been in a laboratory and have seen experiments conducted, like most children have, in which sugar is placed on a spoon and burnt until it becomes charcoal, and then the charcoal is heated up red hot and it is plunged into oxygen, it disappears. The fire and the oxygen cause the disappearance of the dross of charcoal in front of the school child's eyes. It's a very spectacular experience. Now, the same occurs in meditation. Whereas the fire and the oxygen has consumed the carbon and turned it into a gas, so too in meditation does fire consume the most dross part of the personality. We're talking about fire in meditation. Now, there is fire of mind, and there are the fires inherent in atoms. The Tibetan master described them in his book, A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, these various fires. May I just quote: fire internal, fire inherent and fire latent, fire radiatory and emanative, fire generated, assimilated and radiated, fire vivifying, stimulating and destroying, fire transmitted, reflected and absorbed, fire, the basis of life, fire, the essence of all existence, fire, the means of development and the impulse behind all evolutionary processes, fire, the builder, fire, the preserver and the constructor, fire, the originator, the process and the goal, fire, the pacifier and the consumer. The Old Testament talks of God as being an all-consuming fire. And indeed, when we search for spiritual rebirth, baptism, initiation, the process is one of having fire applied to you. The other night I talked about the great extra-systemic fire of Sirius, which is applied to man in initiation. And so this must govern our thoughts when we think of meditation, that we are dealing with the fire of the gods. Now, we need to understand a little more about this. You and I know very well from our esoteric studies that there are 7 planes of matter. 7 planes of matter. That gas, liquid and solid represent the lower of these 7 planes, the 3 lowest. And we understand that the top 4 are related to the etheric body. You and I also know that there is an astral plane of pure feeling energy, and that this plane is graded in a similar way. There are the gross negative feelings of anger and hate and horror, and these are gradated all the way up towards spiritual emotional energy, the highest aspirational energy that we are capable of, the sort of energies we express when we listen to a concerto, a lovely piece of classical music. The feeling generated is of the highest order. But we have to remember that the kingdom of souls has a frontier, and the frontier lies beyond the emotions. And it lies, as it were, the frontier itself, in that part of consciousness which is called the mental plane, the mental plane. Now the mental plane, like the other planes, is graded, and there are the lowest grades of mentality. When you and I manipulate mental essence, living mental entities of the 3 lower planes, these are the thoughts that you and I express in everyday life. But we have to understand that there is mental substance of a higher order, and we call it manas, M-A-N-A-S. And very few individuals are capable consciously of expressing mental energy, a fire. The Manasaputras express this fire, and all of us have the power, the capability of a Manasaputra within us. Meditation brings that power, that capacity out in us. And so all of us are able to express this fiery substance, which is part of the spiritual realm. We could add to that, if you like, the whole plane of Buddhi as being spiritual. We could even go further and put in the plane of Atma, divine persistent will, and we would know then that this was the spiritual frontier. Along there, and there, the spiritual frontier. And so when we come into the field of experimentation with mind, we are knocking at the door. We are knocking at the door of the spiritual kingdom. And if we could but shed ourselves of ordinary thought, then we would be capable of abstracted thought. Abstracted thought. Thought abstracted out of the mundane, the lower 3 planes. What makes those lower planes of thought so mundane? What makes them, as it were, unable, unsuitable, rather, for use to penetrate the kingdom of souls? The answer is that with all of us manifesting this lower type of thinking, we call it active intelligence, with all of us, we are, as it were, polluting it with emotion. Polluting it with emotion. Now, the other day I gave a talk on the vrittis. I talked about the vrittis, and I indicated, we still have a drawing tucked away somewhere here, that the moment a person formulates a thought, there is immediately attached to it emotional tone, that which the psychologist calls affect. And the formulation of the normal processes of thought-making produce thoughts which are clouded, corrupted, if you wish, permeated by emotion, or what is called affect, emotional tones. Now that is true for all of humanity. And many of us think that we are meditating by allowing gentle thoughts, loving thoughts, if you wish, of something or the other flow through our minds, kind thoughts of people at a distance, thoughts of those who are in jail or in hospital. Nothing wrong with that at all. You are on the verge of praying or a variation of praying. But ladies and gentlemen, please don't think that that is meditation. It may be the way leading to it, but when you are using the mind to conjure up thoughts which are, may I use the word, polluted or saturated with emotion or affect, you're not meditating. And many millions of people fondly believe that they are meditating, and there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. On the contrary, it's recommendable. At least it is stirring energies of some sort of high order. But they are barred from meditating because they don't know what meditation is comprised of. Now, the moment that you can halt the thoughts, the moment that you can slow them down, and the moment that you can use certain mechanisms well understood in meditation, and primarily this is focus or concentration, then the thoughts that you've had loaded with affect begin to vanish, and manas pours down. Manas pours down. At the moment that you have manas pouring down, then you have an influx of energy into the lower triad. The lower triad, the personality we call it, the composition of a physical body, an astral body, and a mental body. And the moment that you practice abstracted thought, not saturated with any emotional content, then from the higher triad there floods down manas into the lower triad. And with the constant application of this energy, there is constructed what we well know to be the antakarana, the rainbow bridgehead. So, at the outset, let us understand quite clearly that meditation, in fact, is withheld mainly, or in most people, by the concept that thoughts, or kind thoughts, or gentle, loving, prayerful thoughts is meditation. In fact, as Blavatsky has said, and the Oriental teachings reiterate again and again, the mind, as I have described it in thought content to you here tonight, is the slayer of the real. Now that is a horrific thing for the Westerner to come to grips with. When our schools in the West teach us the value of intellect over all things virtually, it is a horrific consideration for the Westerner to accept that the mind is the slayer of the real. And we mean just that it acts as a barrier. These streams of thoughts that we cannot control, lovely as they may be, these streams of thoughts bar the way across that frontier that I described a little earlier. Now, how can we deal with the problem of getting manas down, of experiencing a slowing of the thoughts? Well, we have to remember that we are trying, like Prometheus, to penetrate another kingdom. When in Rome, do as Romans do, and try and practice the laws that govern that kingdom, not man-made laws. If you try and assault the frontiers of the kingdom of heaven using man-made laws, you will slip and slip again on that steep path. You must learn to use cosmic laws, the laws of the fifth kingdom. And one of the laws of the fifth kingdom is that thought, and we all accept that thoughts are things. One of the laws is that thought is not acceptable. And when we say thought, we mean thought saturated with affect, of the three, comprising the three lower planes of the mental that I described a little earlier. What then is acceptable? What is acceptable between the two? This frontier, what is acceptable at that frontier? The answer is that symbols are acceptable. Ideas are acceptable. Not ideas that become thought, but clear, pure ideas. Ideation, if you like. And so we have to, as it were, come to grips with this extraordinary frontier between the world of the personality and the world of the soul. The kingdom of souls, the kingdom of man. We know so much about man's physical body. We can comfortably chalk it in and say it is at the negative end of a spectrum of consciousness of bodies which man possesses. We understand that physical body well. I spent 7 years at medical school studying it. We also are beginning, through Turlian photography, we are beginning to understand something of the etheric body that energizes it. We begin to understand that that etheric body acts as a vital force, and without it, the various organs of the physical body would soon be attacked by bacteria. We know that the etheric body forms chakras, vortices of energy inside, or rather interpenetrating the physical body. Tomorrow night, after the firewalk, I shall be talking about the astral body, the techniques of astral projection as an alternative program. And I shall be talking about the way in which the astral body, acting as a physiological unit, can be projected to great distances containing the human consciousness, and how it can be used effectively in the field of discipleship. We have an astral body. It is not as thoroughly formed, as palpable as the physical. It is more tenuous. And the consciousness in the astral body is dependent on emotional energies to express itself. We also know, you and I know, that we possess a mental body in which we think, but that the mental body is constantly tinged and corrupted, intermingled with astral substance. Hence, the barrier that is formed just here. We cannot, normal ways of thinking, penetrate beyond the mechanism of the lower mental substance of our bodies. Then, of course, we know that there is another field of consciousness. We know that this is the consciousness concerned with our personalities, the three bodies that I have just described, the etherico-physical, the astral, and the mental. We term them a lower triad, each side of the triangle representing a body. But we also know at the positive end of the spectrum of man's bodies, there lies the spiritual part of man. And this part of man is pure energy. It has no shape or form in terms of what we would describe it here in mundane language. The higher part of man is pure energy. We talk of the energies as they are described in the Puranas and in the other Eastern teachings as being Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. And we know that the soul, in fact, is a vortex of energy. It is a unit of energy which is part of us, but which we have no access to with ordinary consciousness. Sometimes we have experiences of it when our physical bodies are asleep, vague recollections of it in childhood, as I described the other night, vague recollections of it even in old age. But if we wish to penetrate into this world of spirituality, where form has no power, where sound is silent, where light casts no shadow, we have to use the technique of meditation. What is acceptable to this world here? How can we cross that frontier? All of us possess the mechanism in vague form as an antakarana. There is a sutratma linked to the third ventricle of the brain, which links us to this higher triad, this sutratma. Through this thread that links the soul to the personality, a certain amount of energy passes from the soul into the personality. Some of us register this as inspiration. This is the creative force in some of us. We know that an average man, only about 5% of the soul's energy that is available pours into the aura. But with meditation, we establish an antakarana, an absolute bridgehead between the lower triad and the higher triad. And in this condition, the energies of the soul come streaming down into the aura. We can turn the energies on and off. We never waste them. The initiate never wastes those energies. Now, how do we learn to communicate with a higher nature? There is one certain way, and that is through the use of symbol. And there's no good your saying, I'm sure my soul will understand if I describe everything that I have to say to it. That's fair enough, the soul will understand, but the soul will not communicate. The soul must learn to communicate with you, you must learn to communicate with it. And the language that we use is through symbols. The East, of course, recommends a method of building up a keyboard of symbols, a keyboard of symbols. Now, if you and I could only communicate through a typewriter, we would have to be dependent on the keys on that typewriter. And if I couldn't express everything in terms of those keys, I would have to use what I could to communicate with you. We are limited to the keys of the typewriter. Now, man is the same with regard to his soul. If you are impoverished in terms of symbols, then the soul has little to communicate with you. If you will furnish the inner world, if you will furnish inner space, that part of you, that palace within you, then the soul can communicate. Hence the need for giving some time of every day to the careful construction of adequate symbols. We call it visualization in meditation. Visualization is not imagination. Visualization is a conscious process, it's a positive process, and it acts best of all without the five senses. Whereas imagination operates perfectly when the senses are stimulating it. And the imagination runs riot without our control. It is a negative process. And the two are complementary to each other. The East creates a symbol, rather a keyboard, and they call it a mandala. And it's a framework. And you slowly fill in your mandala with all sorts of symbols. And it becomes a pattern board that the soul can communicate. The face of Jesus being present, and so on. Very little of this is understood by the churches, more's the pity. And I have met many individuals in the churches, enlightened beings, like Dr. Curtis in Dallas, whose new church, Unity Church in Dallas, has our 12 stained glass pictures of the zodiac in it. And also other very fine beings have lectured on our platforms at festivals. John Rankin of the Unity Church in Houston, for instance. But even they tend to lose sight of the esoteric principles involved in obtaining access to energy. And in the New Age, as the shift of focus of young people is more away from I believe to I know, we need to have a better knowledge, understanding of how these processes of energization can work. We all know that our subrace is desperate for energy. So massive are the expenditures of energy that we make in everyday living that we're all of us desperately hard put to it to obtain a restoration of the energy that we lose. And so the talk that we're concerned with here today is a very pragmatic one. It's a very pragmatic one. We've just about exhausted our understanding of nutrition. It's all been worked out. The calories and everything have been assessed. The distribution of the amino acids, the mechanisms involved in breakdown of protein and carbohydrate and fats, and so on. There will be no breakthrough in the next 100 years in nutrition. It's as dead as a dodo as far as obtaining further understanding of energy contents of food. Metabolism is a science that is practically worked out like inorganic chemistry. We know everything about it. And so man is going to be forced to look for new sources of energy. These are going to be from the numinostic levels that we're talking about here. And what we're concerned with today is how to tap them. Not waiting for the muses to come, although it's very pleasant to have a room of one's own, to place flowers in it, to put crystals in it that catch the glint of the sun's rays, to use incense, to wash ourselves carefully, to put on fresh linen, perhaps of an orange color. With all these magical devices, we try and encourage the muses to visit. Try and create conditions around us which put us in a state of grace to receive a downflooding of energy. And a lot of it works, there's no doubt about that. Just to be able to get into a high place. Remember Capricorn, in the 10th house, MC, midheaven, high places, helps. But with the New Age, I'm not satisfied with current knowledge, nor is Jung, and nor will the young people be satisfied. Calling upon priests to supply them with energy, or the know-how of obtaining it. They want to get it themselves, and rightly so. What we do know about these energy stores has greatly been enhanced by Professor Carl Jung. It's very hard to discuss them without having to revert to the use of some of the rather abstruse terms that he uses. We only know this, that if an action is repeated again and again, just as the brain cortex will tend to remember it, and you will tend to be good at it if you practice it often enough, you lay down tracks in the brain which enable you to repeat it again with increasing perfection. We also know that repeated actions accumulate energy at an inner level. But always remember that everything that surrounds us has hidden energy content. Words are like icebergs. A word is like the visual part of the iceberg, that which we hear. And what we tend to lack is an understanding of the hidden part of the iceberg, the hidden nature of things. And the Theosophical Society performed a great service in the first part of this century in providing people with the understanding of the hidden nature of things. The hidden nature of things. And so when we repeat something, there is an accumulation of energies which seem to then feed the generations of persons who come after us. It's as if man learns to do something and passes it on from deep levels to the generations ahead of him. His ability to ride horses, the various actions that occur in his everyday life accumulate energies inwardly which tend subsequently to press outwards for expression. We call them, these expressions, instincts. What has been performed by a species for hundreds of centuries, assisting it in its survival, is passed on. We talk about instincts. Energies pressing out from the unconscious of the species of the animal and guiding it. We ourselves have impinged upon us very little in the way of instinct. And still less in the way of reflexes. Push a finger into the hand of a baby, push a finger into the hand of a baby, and the child automatically will grasp the finger, as if touching, so they say, the hair on the animal's back from very ancient times. We, however, want to know more about these energies that are available to us. And Jung has led the belief, the understanding, that the energies are there and they come to us as images. They come to us as images. So we get a numinostic energy, begins to present itself to us as an image, and these images may go on at a fairly low level to press as instincts and drives, and they affect the disposition of our personalities. They affect the dispositions of our personalities. In addition to these outflows of energies coming from the unconscious, which predispose our personalities, there are factors from our environment, our education, our parents. And together, what is coming from within and from the environment gives us the personality. What I'm concerned with here today is not to go over what Jung has said. I do want to emphasize that where you get a group of these instincts, they can form a complex. We talk about the Oedipus complex. And to quote a very easy one that we can understand, there is what we call the apprenticeship complex. We see little boys growing up wanting to be like their fathers. What the father says has numinostic value to the boy. What he does, everything that emanates from the father, tends to have special significance. It activates the complexes hidden in the boy's background. We talk about these complexes as the apprenticeship complex. We'll deal with that on some other occasion. And so, we have man's consciousness being predisposed by complexes that lie in the unconscious, And some complexes are even conscious. Person is embarrassed the boy might be embarrassed in the presence of girls. It's an obvious complex. It's in consciousness, but there are many that are hidden or repressed. And so we get the idea of a personality. Now, in astrology, we relate these complexes to aspects in astrology. And it is part of the task of our ashram, our work, to try and recognize the many complexes that impinge upon us and on our children, our family, and try and assess them by giving them astrological terms. Today we dealt, for instance, with the manifestation of hysteria. But hysteria itself is the outer expression of some sort of complex. Many women have an instinctual desire to dominate a partnership. And if they can't get it by direct action, by their attractiveness and the usual devices, then they will resort to manifestations of it which may present as hysteria. What I'm concerned with here today is not with these many psychiatric complexes which we have begun to correlate with astrology. For instance, there is the Faust complex, and none of us can get very far in our study of esoteric matters without coming up against the Faustus complex. A perfectly ordinary human of a very scientific outlook who wishes to know everything, hence its relevance to the Aquarian age. I know, Aquarius. He wants to know everything. And he bargains with the devil. Give me all knowledge, all power, and you can have my life after death, if it exists at all, he says to himself. And so he gets it, all knowledge and all power. He alienates to himself the powers of God. The Faustus complex. Pluto in Gemini in the 10th midheaven. The apprenticeship complex that I mentioned a moment ago. Venus in Leo in the 3rd. And there's the complex that sometimes afflicts brothers. We call it the Cain complex. Cain and Abel. The derivation from a Hebraic myth. The hatred of one brother for another, showing as jealousy, perhaps rivalry, and so on. Mars conjunct Venus in Pisces in the 3rd. And more recently, we've had the UFO complex, a complex arising out of a messianic desire for wholeness, and experiences and experiencing imagery of wholeness in full consciousness